Hi, I'm Ryan Hollien, Vice President of the A+D Museum.
Hi, I'm Alice Kimm of John Friedman, Alice Kimm Architects, or JFAK, as people like to say.
Great. Thanks, Alice, for joining us today for the interview. I'm excited to talk about your project. What made you select this project for the awards program?
Well, first of all, Koreatown Gateway is one of the favorite projects in the office because of the way it really speaks to kind of I guess I would say a global culture. It sort of weaves together a very strong tie to physical context, but it also brings in technology and the idea of kind of projecting out to a larger population as well. And so we really like that about the project, and we thought it would be really appropriate for submission to this competition in particular.
Most definitely. What was your first project that you felt represented you as an architect?
My goodness, you mean over the course of our entire practice?
Your practice or you personally, if you would like.
Well, I think that two early projects which were really important for us, and we still find a lot of value in looking back at them. One is they're very different from each other. One is a nightclub called Club Sugar. It no longer exists, but it was in Santa Monica, and we finished it in, I think, 1991 or something, pretty early. It was one of our very, very early projects. And that project for us was very experimental. So looking back, it sort of kind of typifies the kind of attitude that we see in LA, which is more open to innovation and experimentation than perhaps other cities and places are in the United States. So we really enjoyed that project. We experimented with a lot of new materials. We experimented with color. There was no natural light in the space, which was actually appropriate since it's a nightclub. But that absence of natural light, which is something that's so important to the majority of our work, actually forced us to really look at lighting and perception in a different way. That project actually sort of turned inside out into a project called the A+D Design Center, which was a project for a furniture manufacturer named Francisco Pinedo and his wife, Alba Pinedo. So the Pinedos had sort of grown up in South Los Angeles, and they wanted to give back to that neighborhood somehow. And so they bought this pair of old dilapidated warehouses, and we turned it into kind of a showroom center, but really also sort of a public space to sort of celebrate South LA, which, at the time, and still very much, is a fairly underprivileged part of town. And so it was a really interesting challenge to create both outdoor and indoor spaces that really spoke to the larger context. We were able to actually use a lot of the ideas about materiality and experimentation in Club Sugar, but bring them to the outside in A+D Design Center. And it was also an adaptive reuse project, which made it also important to us. So I would say those two projects were pretty important.
Terrific. And it sounds like, it sounds like those two projects really informed this project, because I see there's a lot happening here. You're touching on technology, you're talking about the LED, there are aspects of color in the images that you embedded in your boards.
Yes.
So you can see all of those aspects kind of manifesting itself in this streetscape.
Absolutely. I think Koreatown Gateway, because it also, sort of like A+D Design Center, is embedded in a very specific neighborhood that has a very rich cultural history. It became really important to really think about that as a driving point for the project itself. The interesting thing about Koreatown Gateway was that it was I won't say it was a competition, but it was a call for proposals by the LA Neighborhood Initiative, LANI, and who had been working with this steering committee of leaders of Koreatown who wanted to place what they were calling a gateway into the neighborhood. But in fact, the intersection of Normandy and Olympic, where the project is located, it's not really at the end of Koreatown or the beginning. It's actually smack in the middle. So So it's interesting, but the one thing that they really wanted was that they wanted a project that would span the intersection, not sit on one side or another or one of the corners or another, but actually span over the intersection. So that was one challenge. I think we won the project because we showed 3 different options, and one of them happened to span the intersection, which is the one that you see now. And but to us, you know, to me in particular as a Korean American, looking at what makes Korea today. Korea is so much about innovation right now. I mean, it's a very interesting place, and Seoul in particular is a very interesting city because they sort of made this very conscious decision maybe 10, 15 years ago to invest in innovation as an idea, as a real idea. So innovation, education, and technology as drivers of a certain kind of lifestyle. And their goal was really to make a service economy which would make people want to live there and stay, so that, you know, they had seen this mass exodus of people growing up and going over to the United States or Europe or whatever to get educated and never coming back. And they wanted to reverse this trend. And so they made these investments in the idea of innovation and technology, fueled by education as a way of promoting this kind of new economy. And it really worked. So LED technology happens to be something that they're very well known for. You know, and so it just seemed natural to really try to bring the idea of innovation through the vehicle of LED technology into this project and make the project itself about a very contemporary form that still sort of references tradition, but in a very kind of, you know, abstract contemporary way, if you know. So I think those were the sort of driving things behind the project, and we're very proud of it. It also happens to sit next to a traditional Korean pavilion that was brought over from Korea and transplanted into the context. So the 2 things juxtaposed against each other or next to each other, to us also is very interesting. The traditional pavilion next to our gateway. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you about the abstraction, because I know that there's a series of diagrams, and it's interesting to see how you took the traditional form of that structure and then abstracted it in a way. But like you said in your brief, it's, you don't want to be mimicking it,
Right.
but you can see that connection between the two.
Yeah.
A little bit more to the evolution of how you reached that abstraction.
Well, again, because we were looking at a structure that spans, we started looking at overhead structures. And of course, the different forms of the Korean traditional temple, that was something that we looked at pretty carefully. But we also started looking at, and I don't think this may not have been in the brief that we submitted, but we also were looking at other kinds of overhead structures and cantilevering structures that speak about progress and evolution. And, you know, one of them is actually the crane, the construction crane that you see all over the city. And so there's that reference too in the form. It's very clear. And so, I mean, I won't say it was like A to B to C to D progression of things. It really was kind of a little bit more organic and instinctive in the way we kind of looked at the spanning form of a roof and then took one side away and, you know, pulled it apart. And then how do we connect them back together? Well, we can connect them back together with an LED array. Now we're faced with this humongous cantilever. How do we deal with the cantilever? And we started talking to different companies, companies that, for instance, manufacture street poles, light poles, right? And street signs and other kinds of things that you see that come up and then have a single cantilevering arm, and trying to understand their structure. And that included, you know, again, street lights, cranes, you know, things of that nature. But the kind of connective tissue of the LED array started to allow these elements to work together in a way that we felt was very evocative of all of those things, of the traditional temple structure, of the contemporary idea of constructing something and moving forward. So, you know, again, with us, it's always about taking these different clues from a particular context and weaving them together. We never, ever really rely on a singular diagram for anything. That might be considered a weakness, but we think it's a strength, that our work, we hope, is not so reductive. But that's, so that was kind of, those are the kinds of influences that we were thinking about when we designed the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think the layers really add to the richness of it.
Yeah.
And you can see that just in the images that you shared in your brief.
Yeah, it was really, it was
Yeah,
fun.
there's a lot going on there.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that, what strikes me is the form,
Mm-hmm.
you know, creating that form, which does link back to the traditional temple, but
Yeah.
you're doing it a completely contemporary way.
Yeah.
There's a certain lightness to it. And I think it would be amazing, you know, the idea of spanning the street,
Mm-hmm.
which was important to your client.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine how this would evolve depending on which way you're traveling on the streets,
Right.
right? Because it evolves with its asymmetry.
Very much so. Yes. And I should mention this project, we submitted it in whatever category, unbuilt category that we submitted, but it's just about fully permitted. So the project is, it is real. It's completely engineered. We've passed through Public Works. You know, we went through all of their layers of oversight with respect to how high the thing has to be to clear all of the street lights and all the utilities and all of those things. So yeah, it's been an interesting process. Not very similar to that of a building, actually. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine how many of the layers and
Yeah.
agencies you have to get approvals from. What is the height, by the way? What's the magic number that
You have to clear, you have to be above 40 feet. And we're actually more like at around 70. So
wow.
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's a little scary.
The scale's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Looking forward.
Congratulations. That's tremendous. I was going to ask about, you know, what's the future of the project. So it's going to be real.
I mean, I believe so. I believe so. About, I think last April, we got a call. I mean, the project had been sitting for a while, and then we got a call saying that it was approved to move forward. And then we didn't hear anything for a couple more months. And then we heard, yes, it's approved to move forward, and we're revising the contracts because they're outdated. And then a few more months have passed, and, you know, yes, it's moving forward. So it's sort of kind of going through the stages. I think things have slowed down, obviously, because of the pandemic.
Right.
But I think it has a lot to do probably with the 2028 Olympics coming up and things like that. And so how does the city create a memorable set of markers, you know, that will actually allow, you know, the world to kind of look at it and remember certain things, you know, about it. So I think it probably has a lot to do with that desire to make sure that the city, you know, has enough icons within it to take the pressure of the Olympics, for lack of a better.
That makes so much sense. And there's a legacy with the Olympics in LA and the branding and you know, how each neighborhood is represented.
Yes.
And this is such a rich neighborhood. And I think one of the things that struck me when you were talking about it at the beginning is where it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, Koreatown is so large, and you discussed, you know, that the boundary is blurry, which is very true. I mean, this intersection is really important, and it's a really strong community there. Mm-hmm. But I think for a lot of non-Angelenos, they might not think of this as the epicenter of Koreatown. But you know, having lived on the other side of Koreatown for quite some time, I realized that Koreatown is so diverse, and there's so many different epicenters of the activity.
Yeah, it's actually I think it's one of the most interesting neighborhoods in Los Angeles at present. It's so dynamic. I mean, I think half of our staff live in Koreatown right now. There's just a lot going on, and It's actually one of the, also, as you know, it's one of the few neighborhoods that actually has some pedestrianism, active
Right.
pedestrianism in it, which is really great. And it's densifying. Unlike other neighborhoods in LA, it's actually densifying, which is great also. And a lot of new housing and a lot of new sort of institutional facilities and things are really happening there. So it's pretty dynamic. The population, of course, is not, the population of people who actually live in Koreatown is not Korean. It's much more Latino, as you know. So it's just very interesting also how it turns over the course of a 24-hour cycle, which we also like. Yeah. And LA, of course, you know, being such a diverse city, we also wanted to just sort of celebrate the idea of diversity. I mean, you mentioned the color, the aspect of color, and that is really important to us. And it's in all of our work, it's become a really important tool to express in a very simple but effective way the idea of diversity and how we can celebrate it through the use of a lot of different colors. So one of my favorite things about the project also is that one of our staff people who worked on it, named Chris Hyun, who actually might work with you also. Okay, so
Chris.
Yes, Chris worked on this project. Awesome. And he and Jonathan Stahl, Jonathan was really the project architect who took it from beginning to and got it ready to permit and everything. And then Derek Green has taken it over. But Chris was so instrumental in the design, and he actually, he's the one who actually generated the this new kind of graphic alphabet, so that we have Koreatown Gateway spelled out in both Korean and English using an alphabet that he designed, and which I think is really beautiful. And I'm hoping that we can somehow get that graphic alphabet out into the world, separate from the project even, because I think it's a very beautiful thing that he generated. So hi, Chris, if you're out there, because we just love him. And now he works with you. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited that it's moving forward. Look forward to seeing it. Definitely.
Yeah, so do we. Yeah, it's been a while. As with all public projects, it's taken a while, but yeah.
But it's going to be well worth it.
We hope so.
It's going to be quite a marker for that part of town, but then, it's going to be visible from above, which that was one of your images that I absolutely loved, was the rendering.
Yes.
From above, because, whether you're in a helicopter or you're on approach to LAX.
Right. Yeah.
It will totally be visible with the technologies that you're playing with.
Can I mention one more thing? Do we have time?
Of course.
Okay. Well, one of my favorite things about the project is actually the way the LED array is conceptualized to be able to hold any kind of imagery, obviously, that can be transmitted globally to anywhere in the world, and et cetera. But the potential for that also is really to be a canvas for public art. So, when we first entered the competition for the project, we approached an artist, Korean-American artist named Yoon-hee Min. I haven't even spoken to her because the project's been dragging for so long, but we approached her, and she had just had a show at the Hammer of these really beautiful paintings. And, we just said, well, how would you feel about transforming some of your two-dimensional work into, into digital format? And she was very, very receptive and excited. And so one of the images that we always use for the project is one of her pieces from that show that we kind of digitized. And so I'm really excited also by the public art aspect of the project, through that vehicle of the LED array. And I'm really hoping that she will be one of the first artists to be able to have a piece on that gateway once it happens. So.
There's so many opportunities there, because it's that horizontal array versus a vertical array. So it doesn't feel as though it's advertisement. It feels like it's something so much greater than that.
Yeah.
Right? So you can start to use it to sponsor artwork.
Yes.
It'd be amazing. It could also be amazing if there was a network of these.
Yes, it would be. It really would be.
Pop up around different parts of town.
Yeah. That would be fantastic. A lot of potential. And I think LA is a place where these things can happen. They haven't happened yet, but we think it's a place where these things can definitely happen. So.
Yeah. Well, it'll be tremendous. It'll help transform the street. So can I ask what brought you to the field? How did you find your way to architecture?
My goodness. Let's see. um, People might assume that it's because I'm the daughter of an architect. So my father is an architect. He grew up in Seoul, in Korea. He grew up in Korea, and then he came to the United States and studied at IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology, in the last years of Mies van der Rohe. And then he worked in the office of Mies van der Rohe, and he taught at IIT and stuff. So he is a high modernist architect with a passion for Romanesque architecture, actually, which that's another story. So I think people assume that must be why I became an architect. And I think it is indirectly, but in college, I didn't start thinking about architecture until I happened to have many friends who were in the architecture school at Cornell. And so, and they were so consumed by what they did. And I was always sort of envious. Why are you so consumed with what you're doing? What is that passion that you have? And I wanted that passion. And so I did start taking some studio classes, not in the architecture school, but finding other vehicles for that. And then I applied to graduate school and ended up at the GSD. And so that's how I became an architect. And, coincidentally, John's father is also an architect, did a lot of housing from Northern California, from the Bay Area. And he, studied architecture at MIT. And then we met at the GSD. So we both come from we're both of architecture families. I don't think any of our kids will become architects, but yeah, so I know, you never know, and it might be one of the ones that we would never think would become an architect, but we have 3 kids and right now it just doesn't seem like any of them will, but yeah, so.
Well, I can tell you for the profession and for our community, it's great that you both caught the bug.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what brought you to the Design Awards and the A+D Museum?
I mean, I think that, I always pay attention to what the A+D is doing. And so we found out about this Design Awards online, and also somebody we work with is on the board, I think. And so, she mentioned it as well. And we know several people who are involved in the program. And so it seems like a great program, and we were really excited to participate.
Yeah, I mean, this was our inaugural one.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Exactly.
something we're going to be doing every year. So
yes,
it's interesting to hear feedback on it and
yes,
to learn from it,
yes.
to evolve. So speaking of evolution, what do you want the A+D Museum to be?
Well, I think that there's so much great design and architecture in Los Angeles. And so I think that we would love to see A+D continue to evolve into, just becoming a really strong center where we know that we can go to see what is going on in architecture and design, what is evolving, how it's going to progress and develop in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And just a place where we can all have a voice of some sort. That there's the AIA LA, of course, and I think they're doing a great job. But the A+D is another kind of thing. It's I think there's just a lot of potential for new voices in particular and new work to be highlighted in a way that it's not. And I think that the A+D would be the institution to do that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. I think that there's so many different directions that you can go, and we look forward to seeing where you go, what paths you take. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alice.
Absolutely. No, thank you. It was a pleasure. And thank you again for the award. It's really great that the project won an award.
Yeah, it's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.